All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Liam McCullum Show. Today, I have a very special guest on. It's Dan Sanchez. He was somewhat of a mentor of mine over the last year at the Foundation for Economic Education. I went through their apprenticeship, their Hazlitt Fellow program uh, at the beginning of the year. It was a 6-month long apprenticeship, and I gained a lot of wisdom, and I really am honored to be able to have gone through that experience and meet Dan and kind of build a relationship with him. So I'm happy to have you on the show, Dan.
Well, thank you, Liam. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been one of the great benefits of the project is to build connections with great young thinkers like you, and it's just been really great to see you be influential and for the good, especially on social media and in libertarian movement activism.
Yeah, and what I wanted to talk about today is really a lot of the lessons that I learned from you while going through that apprenticeship, and some of the recent things you've been writing about like the need for precise speech and kind of the impact of that. But before we hop into that, why don't you just introduce yourself for people who don't know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm the director of content and editor at FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. And so at FEE, we teach the freedom philosophy and especially sound economics, Austrian economics particularly. FEE was founded in 1946, and so it's the oldest libertarian think tank of the world. and and we're all about spreading the ideas because Leonard Reed believed that it is through understanding liberty that society will come to embrace liberty. He also taught that that the way that you help other people understand liberty is to build your own understanding of liberty. And so in the Hazlitt Project, that's what we're trying to develop are teachers who are learners and who learn out loud and invite other people to join in their learning. And so that's just been a passion of mine throughout my career. Even before entering the liberty movement, I was working in education, and I've always been wanting to crack the code, not only of what makes for a good society, but how people learn, how truth and understanding can spread. And so that's what I try to do at FEE. I try to teach the public, but I also try to teach teachers of the public, and that's what the Hazlitt Project's all about.
And recently, I've seen that you've taken on somewhat of a private project and something to better yourself, and you've been publishing articles every single day, kind of trying to be someone that these Hazlitt Fellows can look up to, and hopefully gain wisdom about how to do that. And I've definitely, even though I've moved on from the program, I've gained a lot of wisdom, and I really appreciated being able to see how dedicated you are to releasing an article every single day. So you recently started this Substack, and you have 3 different series, I believe, on different topics, and I'm interested in every single one of them. So you have Letters on Liberty, Civilize Thyself, and then what is the title of the one about superheroes?
Superhero studies.
Okay, yeah, and they're all great, and I've been following them pretty closely, and I'll link to each of them in the description of this podcast. But I've really been picking up on this theme that you keep touching on. I think that runs through it all, and maybe I'm missing here, and it's not a theme that you're touching on, and you can talk about that. But it appears that you're talking about the importance of speech, importance of precise speech, and the written word as well. And specifically, I'm thinking of the article on John Locke being the most dangerous man in the world. This was very fascinating to me, especially reflecting on Reformation Day, which I celebrated this last Monday, where I was reflecting on, the impact that the overall Enlightenment period and the printing press had on the world, and John Locke, who kind of came out of this movement as well. So I'm wondering if you can kind of explain why John Locke is the most dangerous man of the world, at least during his time, and make your case there.
Sure. Yeah, I make the point that he doesn't look particularly formidable. And the painting that I use in the article, it kind of contrasts with the title in a way, because he was very gaunt. He was asthmatic. He at the time that I was writing about, the time of his life that I was writing about, he was in his 50s. And and so normally, when you think of someone who's dangerous, you think of like someone who's like James Bond, someone who's a physical force, or at least um, is the leader of physical forces like Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great. But John Locke, it was more powerful than any of those types of people, and his power was through ideas. And like I said, he was suspected of conspiring to assassinate the then King of England, but really that's not what made him dangerous. That what made him dangerous was his pen, not his sword. And he ended up overthrowing not just one monarch, but basically all of them, because his ideas swept the world, and his ideas discredited the absolutist monarchy ideology that had been dominating ever, especially since King Louis XIV modeled that, but even before then. And and it was all in just this book, this book that he wrote called Two Treatises of Government, that that became the catechism of the American Revolution, really, and really was the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence, of the Bill of Rights, and of the Revolution itself. And then the American experiment that followed that became the wonder of the world, and everyone wanted to emulate the success of the American experiment, and so country after country, especially in Europe, had movements towards liberty and away from absolute monarchy, and it ultimately led to liberalization on many fronts. Ultimately led to economic liberalization that led to the Industrial Revolution, that led to prosperity that was historically unprecedented, where you have every generation living vastly better lives in terms of material security than the generation beforehand. And that just wasn't the way of things before. That human prosperity was pretty much static, that everyone could basically expect to live the same living standards that their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents did through virtually all of human history, until we reached this inflection point of what's been called the hockey stick of human prosperity. That was all because of the Industrial Revolution, and that was not because of technology, the way that a lot of people think it was. That what tapped the power of technology was liberty, was security and property rights, and especially of capital goods. And it all stemmed back from the ideas that John Locke made popular.
Yeah, and John Locke really kind of informed the tradition that you and I belong to in libertarianism. I actually got involved in, or interested in, libertarianism through John Locke, and learning about natural law in my civics class in high school. I was lucky enough to be taught by a libertarian in civics in high school. Not everyone gets to say that, but I later found out, when I discovered Rothbard, that he really bases his libertarianism off of a natural law theory, and all of this kind of stems from Aquinas and John Locke. So really, I mean, he's influencing our political thought as well, at a very deep level. And and this really reminds me of something that you talked a lot about while I was in this Hazlitt Fellow project with you, about messaging and how we should properly message as libertarians. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of controversy about like LP messaging and Libertarian Party New Hampshire's messaging. And I honestly don't know where I lie on a lot of these things. I'm friends with people who are with Libertarian Party New Hampshire, and I went through your guys' program where we talked about how to properly message and how we should really base our messaging and ideas. So I'm wondering if you can kind of make the case for Leonard Reed's methodology for spreading liberty, and how we should be talking about liberty to people.
Sure. So Leonard Reed basically taught that the way that you improve the world is by not trying to improve the world, but rather improving yourself. That there's a difference between meddling and modeling, and that true leadership is not meddling; it's modeling. It's demonstrating your own understanding. It's showing moral leadership, and it's what in terms of the realm of ideas, it's learning out loud, and sharing what you're learning with people who might be in a place in their own journey where they're looking for that particular piece of the puzzle themselves. So Leonard Reed taught that there's no master key, that everyone's lock is different, and if you try to force your key on someone who isn't at a point where that key is particularly what works, then they're just going to resent you for it. And so I have this article called Keith Smith's for Liberty, and I argue that what we need to do is work on our own understanding and work on our own keys and offer it through writing, through speaking to people, and those with ears to hear will hear it. But those who can't, don't. If you try to impose it against their will, that's like casting pearls before swine. That Leonard Reed taught that everyone controls admission to their own mind, and they're only going to let an idea in if they voluntarily do it. And so really it is that approach that tends to work. And the way I think of the LP messaging, I have these recent posts where I talk about education versus indoctrination, and the way I define that is indoctrination is about consequences. It's about getting someone to conform with a certain opinion or a certain way of thinking through like some kind of adverse consequences or beneficial consequences. And when you think about it, that's what social justice warriors do, and that's what like woke inquisitors do, is that they that's what cancel culture is that it's the threat of being canceled, of being suffering from disassociation, of losing followers, of losing fans, of losing reputation, of losing friends even, and losing money, and losing one's career. I mean, losing one's bank account even. I mean, we saw with Kanye, like, you know, how far cancel culture can go. And what I argued is that cancel culture is really part of what we used to call call out culture, and cancel culture is just like the furthest extreme of calling out. But calling out is still all about consequences. Like it might not be to the point of canceling, but it's still basically shaming someone for wrongthink, and getting people to conform in order to avoid the consequences of that, avoid the social consequences of that. That can work to get outward conformity, but that's not the way people learn. And the way that people learn is like what Leonard Reed described, is when an idea is presented to them, and they are helped to understand the idea. And so I think that I think that the answer to call out culture and shame culture for bad ideas is not call out culture for good ideas. Because for one thing, that like I argue that is losing, that's a losing playing field for good ideas, because good ideas have an inherent advantage in that they're good, that they're true. And when the mechanism is through understanding, we're going to have an advantage over false ideas, because the truth will out, because through understanding, people to the degree that they actually do understand reason and evidence and argumentation, then it wins. Then truth has a natural advantage. But when it comes to the shame game, and when it comes to like name calling and saying, like, basically threatening social consequences, the truth has no particular advantage. If anything, like people who are less scrupulous and who believe bad ideas, that they're going to have more of an advantage in that. And so I think that one, it doesn't work, that's not how you get actual understanding. And two, it's not our natural advantage. And so, like, answering people who are saying like, oh, well, never mind arguing, we're just gonna, call you a racist, call you a bigot, with, okay, never mind arguing, we're just going to call you a warmonger, call you a war criminal, and we're going to like mock you and make you feel bad, and like, again, I don't think that that's our natural advantage, and I don't think that's how you get people to change minds. Now, and I want to qualify that, because I do think that people who advocate foreign wars are war criminals. And so maybe that wasn't the best example to use, because I do think it's important to call things by their proper names, and as a way of helping people to understand the truth about morality and about society, to not have double standards for agents of the government and people who use the power of the government to do things that we would consider atrocious for any private person to do, like killing people, killing innocent people. But I think there's a difference between saying, you are favoring war crimes because of X, Y, and Z, and that is evil, and that versus like the example that came up on Twitter, like, haha, I'm glad that you're crying because your war criminal father died. Like, I think that's fundamentally different, because there's no expression of there's no explanation there. There's no enlightenment about the difference between right and wrong. It's basically just trying to use social pressure to make anyone who advocates a certain policy, just feel bad and be socially ostracized. And again, I don't think it works, and I don't think it's a winning battle.
Yeah, I am interested in what you think about the strategy of being controversial and maybe humorous. If you've looked into the angle of like how humor is able to convince people, and if it's capable of attracting people and changing people's minds. I have been critical of LPNH too, even though I'm friends with people involved with LPNH. I just interviewed Reed Coverdale about messaging and kind of his take on the strategy. And I was critical also of the McCain tweet, and I think I didn't really know why. It was more of a guttural feeling, but I think you summarized it pretty well, and you kind of crystallized to me how I feel about it. Is that I would rather, get people to understand why McCain is a war criminal before saying that he deserves death because he's a war criminal. Because the truth is that the current state of things, most people do not believe that he's a war criminal, nor do they even know anything about McCain's history. Most people think that he's just a politician who deserves to be revered, and that's the extent they know anything about McCain. So I think you were right, and I think in this particular instance, I do agree with you that we should be educating and trying to move people in the direction of understanding why we're criticizing McCain before we come out and we post things like that, because the truth is most people see that right now and they think there is this revered politician in front of us. Why would someone be laughing or mocking their death? Because they don't understand the backstory here. But I am wondering about the overall idea that we should be controversial and potentially just use comedy and humor to bring people to liberty. Do you think that there's any use in that?
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of what makes something funny is when there's a truth to it. I mean, there's a lot of some of the best comics are truth tellers, and a lot of times it's a truth that, or at least an exaggerated version of a truth that a lot of people might not be willing to admit to, and may not. But then when they hear it, then they recognize it, and so humor can definitely be a way of truth telling, and even sort of controversial comedy and sort of pushing the envelope of acceptable opinion, that again that's what makes things funny, and so that can work, and that can work in it is a form of communication, and it can lead to education actually, because it can make people rethink things. I think that there is a danger, however, and I think it's connected sort of with another issue that I have with things like the McCain funeral tweet, is that it's risky, that it's tempting to not be about trying to get people to realize something, even in a humorous way, that it can be fun just to get a rise out of people for the sake of getting a rise out of people, like just for the sake of, especially someone who you might rightfully resent for promoting policies that get people killed and have their liberty lost, that it can be easy to indulge in that, such that you're just making, you're not reading the room, and you're just saying things that in order to antagonize people, and in order and in that might actually end up making people more solidly cling to their position, because you know because they don't think it's funny, and because they resent it, and because a lot of people don't think it's funny. And so I mean, there's no like science to it. Like it's all about reading the room. But I think that's why it really matters, like where our hearts are, and to the and that's why, like, I'm really I really have concern about thoughts like, I'm glad he's dead, I'm glad she's suffering, because once it becomes about once it becomes wrath, and once it becomes like Schadenfreude and wishing ill, like ill will towards another person, that then that becomes like the objective, and then like truth and justice and making things better can get lost, because ultimately it's just sort of like just about the momentary pleasure of the feeling of antagonizing someone. And so I just think that we need to like be careful to make sure that our hearts are in the right place, and that our what's motivating us is in the right place.
Yeah, I really appreciate that too, because as a Christian, it almost seems like you want to avoid the spirit. So when you are hateful like that and wrathful like that, I think that you're sharing in the same exact spirit that you're criticizing and reacting against, and it's very reactionary, and it's all oriented towards the same destruction that we hate. And for me, there was a lot of mockery around that tweet about um, whether we should be civil, whether we should, you know, be civilized with these people who are the most uncivil people on earth, being that they are war criminals. And I think in this, the problem was really like mischaracterized. The problem isn't that we are against being civil per se. Our criticism is that these people aren't civil because they're war criminals. So that doesn't mean that we throw off civility entirely. It's just that we, aim towards it more steadfast and try to be more civil in our principles and in the way that we carry ourselves, because we recognize that these people who are against liberty are not civil. So I think that we kind of, the response was something to the effect of like, well, why be civil because these people aren't, when it's like, perhaps maybe we should be because they aren't. So I don't know. I really appreciate that kind of what you're getting at about the heart issue here, especially as a Christian, because I don't want to revel in the deaths of my enemies. I hope that spiritually they turn as well, and they turn towards liberty, towards freedom, and love of one another.
Yeah, I think that there is a risk of becoming that which you hate, and that sort of the example that Jesus in the Bible emulated of loving thy enemy, and turning the other cheek, that that there's a reason why that philosophy swept the world, and there's a reason why social movements that emulated that aspect through like peaceful civil disobedience, um, and just exemplifying love and grace, and being not what your opponents our being, and being very, very distinct from them, that I think that's it's not only good for our own souls, but it's inspiring to others. It and so yeah, so I think that I think that ultimately it's good on many levels.
Yeah, and I don't think that that means we can't criticize these people. I think it is just more about how we carry ourselves in doing so. And also, I think it gets really to the heart of, a quote that we hear a lot in the liberty movement about, how a revolution not based in love will always end in tyranny. And something that I really fear is that if there were ever a liberty movement that is based out of hate and hate of the oppressors and the tyranny that came before us, that it would just evolve again into like a French Revolution type thing.
Mhm.
You hear a lot of like the stuff that was said around the time of the French Revolution, and I think us libertarians would agree with the spirit of a lot of it, and not agree with a lot of things too. But um, the truth is that I think the reason it became the revolution that it turned out to be is because it was based in hate and not love. And I worry about the if we're oriented towards, or we're carried and animated by the wrong spirit, I guess, even in our libertarian ideals.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that another thing to consider is that that throughout history, whenever any group just defined itself as anti something, as much as it is for something, then again it kind of it loses its moral bearing, because it's like, okay, whatever is against the enemy, then I'm for that. Like, and so we see that with anti-communist movements, and both in America, the anti-communist movements of the 50s and 60s, and anti-communist movements in Europe that eventually evolved into fascism, that they were so fixated on an enemy that became the defining orientation of the movement, as opposed to something more more principled, like a cause, like liberty, and like virtue, and so then that's just like a risk, because that's how you become that which you hate, because then you start to adopt the enemy's tactics, and you start to act like them, and that's another thing that Leonard Reed taught, is that the same um, strategies that may work for advancing statism will not work for advancing liberty.
Now, all of this kind of, I think, really, a lot of this is informed by your series on Civilize Thyself that you've been writing
Oh,
about on Substack.
but before we move on, I
Yeah.
remembered another point that I wanted to make. I just want to like really reiterate that, like, I don't mean that we should give um, proponents of evil policies a pass, or that we should mince words in describing the enormity that they advocate. So, like, one of my favorite writers is the late Will Grigg, and he was just a master at describing exactly the moral failing of you know um, abusive and violent police officers, and politicians who perpetrate wars, and he didn't mince words. Like, he called it for what it was, and so that I really do appreciate about the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, and the Mises Caucus, is that they're not afraid to, call injustice what it is, and to call evil acts what they are. But I don't think that you need to. It's like the old saying of hate the sin, love the sinner. So I don't think you need to hate the sinner in order to hate the sin.
Yeah, and I think all of this just demonstrates like how important it is to you to be careful with your speech and be precise in your speech. And I know that you're influenced by Jordan Peterson, and this is something that I've really struggled with when I go on interviews and when I'm writing. I am very aware of when I'm tripping on my words, and I do it very often. So something that I've really appreciated about your work and this series that you have on Substack about Civilize Thyself is just your process of writing, and how you really emphasize that we need to create habits for ourselves and really collect ourselves, and then that will make us better people, and it will also make us better representations of the ideas that we want to bring out into the world, and we hope that the world embraces. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the importance of writing and your writing process and some of the tips that you share in this series.
Sure. So I have one post called "How to Create Like a Bastiat," and I share advice that was offered by two of Bastiat's greatest emulators, Leonard Reed and Henry Hazlitt, and they talked a lot about the benefits of writing, that that writing is how you master ideas. That Leonard Reed said that an idea that you can't write lucidly about is an idea that you have not mastered yet. And so that's why, and that's how I learned Austrian economics when I was first learning these things, is that I would write blog posts, and then they ended up getting published at Mises.org, and I would just read Mises and then try to synthesize what I was learning into like an essay, and that's how I would come to understand that area of Mises's thought. And so that's why writing is such a big part of the Hazlitt project, is because that's how I'm hoping that the Hazlitt Fellows will also master these ideas, and is by coherently and persuasively and clearly making it understandable to readers, that to comprehend means being comprehensible. And so and another thing that Hazlitt and Reed talked about is how writing aids in concentration. And so in a lot of my posts, I really advocate what I've been doing lately, which is writing first thing in the morning, because it just, like, I have this post called "Write Your Way into a Good Day," or a great day. And I'm sorry, I have someone at the door.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that interruption. I'll have to repeat myself a little bit. I had housework being done at the time. So yeah, writing really helps with concentration. That, like I said, I've been writing first thing in the morning, and it really helps to marshal your thoughts. And so it's just a really great, writing is basically like you at your most reasoned, articulate, thoughtful self. And so, tapping into that especially first thing in the morning, for me, it just makes me smarter like the rest of the day. It just makes me better at analyzing things. It makes me better at problem solving. And so yeah, I just really recommend the writing to help you think, and to help you learn, and to help other people learn. It's just a really great practice.
Yeah, you highlighted it a little earlier, but I'm wondering if you can dive deeper into it. But what does your writing process look like? Do you find like source material that you're interested in and then unpack it? And yeah, how long do you spend writing? And I guess what does your morning look like?
Yeah, so in the morning, I will first do some reading to to ease into it. And lately, I've been like you mentioned my superhero Substack, so I'll read my favorite uh, comic book author, Grant Morrison, who I've written about extensively on my Substack, and and then I'll actually do like page summaries of each page of one issue, and I'll add commentary for about things I notice, points, references that I think he's making, points that he's trying to make, because he's a very philosophical writer. He's not your average superhero comic writer, and that's just for myself. Like that's just for my own journaling, and so that is kind of like an on ramp into writing to publish, and so before too long, then I'll switch over to writing for the daily Substack, and then it'll depend on what day of the week it is. So on the weekends, that's when I do my superhero writing mostly, because it's kind of like a more fun thing to write about. And then on the weekdays, I'll do my self-improvement writing and my liberty writing. And oftentimes that's centered around what I'm working on, either in self-improvement or in liberty. That if we're covering a certain topic in the curriculum of the Hazlitt project, and if I'm going to be delivering a lecture soon, that I will write an essay that informs that lecture, and that really presents the idea that I'm going to be talking about, and so that often is what drives that, and so that's why I've been writing about John Locke a lot, because we've been covering libertarian civics and discussing the ideas of John Locke. And then similarly for self-improvement, it's whatever I'm working on then, like whatever I'm thinking about and whatever how I'm trying to improve, like whatever kind of systems that I'm trying to develop, or new techniques, new habit formation techniques, or new productivity techniques, life hacks that I'm trying. And so I'll write about it, and it's really been synergistic, because it helps me to think through these life hacks. It helps me to put them to the test. It helps me to elaborate them and understand them more, and it helps me to adopt them to a greater degree. So yeah, so that's and I try to I try to have a backlog of ideas to write about, and that's another thing that I talk about in my Bastia article, about the importance of just what Hazlitt calls catching ideas on the fly. That you have to catch them in the wild, like just whenever they come to you, and just always have a pen and a paper or your smartphone ready, and just have the habit of actually writing down any kind of insight that you have, any kind of if you're reading and you notice something that you might like to write about, or if you're reading, if you're thinking about some subject and some kind of a connection comes to mind, then don't assume that you'll be able to recall it later when you're setting down to write. That it's a really good practice to capture it immediately, so that it'll be available for you when it is time to write.
Oh, I'm muted there. You've written briefly about habit formation, and you recently published a post, I think it was on Facebook, if not on Substack, about Aristotle and the use of habit to kind of build character. And I'm wondering if you can kind of unpack that and talk about what you were posting about there.
Sure. So Will Durant paraphrased Aristotle as saying that we are what we repeatedly do, that virtue therefore is not an act but a habit, and then Plutarch said something to the effect that that our habits make up our character, and then Heraclitus, another ancient philosopher, said that a man's character is his fate, and then there's a really neat English saying that I also put in the post that ties them all together. That you in acting you form your habits, and in your habits you form your character, and with your character you shape your destiny. And so really, habits are the key point there, because that is what paves the way for future actions, is whatever becomes habitual. And there are techniques for sort of hacking your habits, that your habits work in a certain way. And there's really great books out there that describe what a lot of scientific research has demonstrated about habit formation. I really especially recommend Atomic Habits by James Clear. And so you really can make a conscious effort to shape your habits, and not to just take them as a given, like as an eternal part of your personality. And that's really, I think, is really what works in terms of behavioral change, as opposed to sort of like the New Year's resolution approach of like thinking that some moment of inspiration is just going to get you to go to the gym, like every day for the rest of the year. And but the thing is that inspiration fades, and it has to be built on something stronger than inspiration. And what you can do is you can convert that inspiration to a habit by being conscious about how you form that habit, about determining what are the cues that is going to signal your behavioral response. What are the cues that you're going to make it a point to always respond to with your new habit. And James Clear has all these methods of how to make your new good habits like obvious and attractive and just easy to follow through on. And if you make it a project, and if you focus in on especially like a limited number of habits at first, that you can that's what can create permanent change, because if you can do it for a couple months, 3 months in a row, then that's like a new like circuit that you've installed in your brain, and that's what creates permanent change.
Yeah, and to tie it back to like what you were talking about earlier with writing and how that really makes you comprehend things better. I've noticed that the podcasts that I feel the most confident about are the ones that I've actually written notes about before I go into them. And it's almost like I can lift off the words from the page, even if I wrote it like weeks ago. There's something about memorization and comprehension and writing. Um, and I've really appreciated your writings for kind of diving into that.
Thank you. Yeah. It's made a big difference. Like I've been needing to practice what I've been preaching for a while. That like I feel like I hadn't been as prolific as I could be, and as I should be, because like writing is an important part of my identity, and it's an important way that I think that I am well suited to do good in the world, and I just wasn't making time for it. Like I was, publishing like once a month, sometimes, and that's just not enough. And what the great thing about daily, there's just like a big difference between like doing something every few days and doing something daily, because we have our daily rhythms, and there are just these really strong cues that come along with our daily rhythms. So if you can work a habit to make it daily, then it really makes a big difference, because I think that's what made the difference for me, is that when I decided, like, okay, if I'm going to ask the fellows to do this daily writing challenge, like I should do it myself. And I think that if it had been like, well, like once every few days I'll try to make it a point, then that's just so easy to forget, and so easy to like eventually drop. But when you make it a point of like, okay, this specific cue that happens every morning, like I'm going to write, and I'm going to make a point to click publish on something every single day. And another point that I make is to not expect yourself, if you're going to do a daily writing habit like this, don't insist on having a certain length of the piece, because if you do that, then it'll be easy to skip, because it's like, okay, well, if I'm not going to be able to write the full length, then I might as well not do it at all. And then once you totally skip a practice, then it stops forming as a habit. And so a lot of great habit books, like including my favorite in this subgenre called Mini Habits by Stephen Guise. Stephen Guise talks about what he called the one push-up challenge. That he the way that he got in shape was, instead of challenging himself to like go to the gym and do like a full set, every time he worked out, that he just challenged himself to do just one push-up a day. And he said that a mini goal like that, like a mini habit, is so, what he calls, stupid easy, that you feel ridiculous for not doing it. And so it's like, okay, I'll do it. But then once you're down on the ground doing one push-up, like getting to that first push-up is like where most of the willpower is required. But then once you've started, it's easy to just do a whole set. And then once you've done a whole set, it's easy to do more sets. And then it's easy to do like other exercises too. And then before you know it, you have a whole workout. And similarly with writing, that some days I'm just super busy, and so all I can muster, or I'm just super like low willpower or something. All I can muster is like a collection of quotes, or just like a really brief thought. And 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 but I show up, and I don't break the chain. Like Jerry Seinfeld would put an X on the calendar every time he'd work on his routine, and he made it a point, just don't break the chain. And many habits make it easy to not break the chain.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because I employed that strategy without even really knowing that I was doing it, I guess, while trying to get myself to go to the gym during college. I would tell myself that I at least needed to go to the gym, wake up and go to the gym in the morning. Um,
Yeah.
and that's what I did. So even if I wasn't going to do a full workout that was really intensive, I could feel really tired and weak that day, as long as I was there and, did lightweight, or I was there and maybe walked around the track. Uh, I checked off that mark for the day. But what ended up happening is, since I'm at the gym, I actually do a full workout over time. So it's interesting that you just kind of crystallize exactly uh, what I subconsciously, I think, was doing. But as for writing, just being like fully open and honest, like when I was in the Hazlitt Fellow program, I really struggled with developing these habits and actually getting um, to put something on paper. And I only published one article with you, and it was actually co-authored with you. Um, and it was like I feel like pulling fingernails just to actually get down and write a full piece. But I gained so much from that, and just talking with you about these habits, and now reading your Substack. So I really encourage everyone to go and follow these articles that you're publishing, because you have stuff here titled "Tracking Your Actions," just click publish on something, make your space a sacred ground, which is about like cleaning the area in which you're working. And yeah, all of this has been really helpful for me, and I'm definitely hoping to employ these things in the future. But you mentioned your interest in comic books, and I wanted to touch on this before I let you go. One of the articles you recently wrote was about Grant Morrison and how he learned to stop worrying about the bomb. And this was really fascinating because I've always had an interest in comic books, and I've been somewhat of a normie, but anytime someone talks about comics, I get interested, and I follow the movies and stuff like that. So it was interesting to hear that there's a more philosophical comic book that is touching on topics that are very important today. So I'm wondering if you can unpack that comic book and the article you were talking about, and how Grant Morrison learned to stop worrying about the bomb.
Sure. So yeah, Grant Morrison, he's known as a very avant-garde comic book writer. So there's the Doom Patrol series that's on HBO Max, like that's based on his run on the Doom Patrol, and it was very just countercultural and surreal and um, and postmodern even. And he would have lots of books like that that would explore different kinds of superheroes. But he also surprised people, especially in the 90s, that he has this traditionalist streak in him too. That he grew up on Silver Age comics, so like the comics of the 60s that were, and so probably the closest analog that people might be familiar with is like the Super Friends. Like it was kind of along the same lines of, it was just very simple, um, uh, like child friendly stories, but there was a reason why they had such an appeal, that they had such a universal appeal, much more than Super Friends, because Super Friends is actually really like cheesy and really low quality in a lot of ways. But these Silver Age comics, they're really formative to him, and there was always that part of him, so that when he started writing like the big characters, like the like Superman and Batman and the Justice League, that a lot of people expected him to have sort of like this subversive spin on these characters. But he ended up just doing these like really they were like really sophisticated and really but but they were also really, they kind of talked about, they exemplified traditional morality, and they exemplified like the classic Superman as being really pure and not jaded and not like Hamlet, like the way that so many writers treat Superman. And that was really, it was really successful. Like it was huge. Like the JLA series was just a blockbuster series in the 90s. And then later when he wrote the series All-Star Superman, again, this was very traditional Superman. It was very Silver Age Superman, and and but it's beloved. Like people think of it as like the definitive Superman story in comic book form. So I've just ever since I discovered him in the 90s when I was in college, I've just absolutely loved his stuff, and there was just something about it. But it was only later when I read his book called Super Gods that that I fully understood what about his work spoke to me so much. And I started to understand his whole philosophy of superheroes and his theory of superheroes, and like what they represent, and why we find them so fascinating. And really it's sort of like why we thought Zeus was fascinating, and Hercules and Gilgamesh, it's these larger than life depictions of humanity that because they're larger than life, that they're ways of abstracting these ideals, these ideals of virtue, of physical health and physical strength and courage and bravery, and that Superman and other superheroes, that they basically push the same button for us. And so he talked about how the superhero comics that he discovered when he was a child were so formative for him, especially because it helped him resolve an existential crisis, because he was a really sensitive child. And at the time, like in the 60s, like, this is the time of like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Cold War was getting really bad, and there's just like nuclear scares. And his father was an anti-nuclear activist. So in addition to comics, there would be these anti-war zines, these magazines lying around the house, with like these gruesome images of what the world would look like after a nuclear war. And so from a very young age, like the thought about everything being destroyed and everyone dying because of a nuclear war, it haunted him. But at the same time, his mother was like a science fiction fan, and so there would be these novels lying around of these visions of the future that was super optimistic and amazing, where like all where technology, instead of being used to destroy ourselves, was used to uplift ourselves to like another level, for humanity to transcend its limits. And so he felt like it was like he didn't know which way the world was gonna go. Like and superheroes, like when he discovered superheroes, like that's what made him realize like the kinds of values and the kinds of optimism that can help humanity move away from apocalypse and towards utopia, and toward to making the world a better place. And so he would say that, the bomb was an idea, but Superman was a faster and better idea. And what he really meant by that is that Superman, as he was written, especially at the time, was just this distillation of what he said is our highest, kindest, wisest, toughest selves. And again, it's, of course, it's unrealistic, but it doesn't have to be realistic to be inspiring. It's a picture of these ideals. And when you read like a good Superman story or watch a good Superman movie, it was really formative for me. Like, especially I have posts about watching Superman 2, and it really taught me like what virtue looked like and what true heroism looked like. And I think that's what can make people better people, and the kind of people who don't call for brinksmanship with a nuclear power just because it helps your party, or just because because you believe the propaganda that you've been fed. And that I don't think it's a coincidence that we've been fed a steady diet of these nihilistic, quote unquote, subversive narratives where there's no true heroes, there's only anti-heroes, and that there's no like that values like bravery and selflessness and hard work and industry and sacrifice, that those are considered judgy, and that it's no coincidence that with that kind of stories that we tell ourselves, that we are have this like nihilistic view of politics, that we think that that like humanity is a cancer on the earth, and that like it would be better for the earth if humanity was wiped out, and that people are willing to risk the end of humanity just for so that we can like exercise our power, and or whatever reasons that they have for wanting to intervene in Ukraine, like, which is like a dispute between two nearby countries on the other side of the world that we should have nothing to do with. So I think that that superheroes, and so what I'm really hoping we can do is we can like restore the superhero, because I think that's why superheroes have been so popular, like especially like since the year 2000, all the way through like 2019, is that to some degree, that especially like the Marvel movies captured that kind of optimism and that kind of celebration of human virtue, and but lately that's been really slipping, and lately a lot of these superhero movies that they've been like going into woke politics, and instead of virtue signaling and victimhood ideology and all these anti-values, really. And I think it's no coincidence that that's also disappointing at the box office and in viewer ratings, because whatever people say are their values and their ideologies, like something about true virtue like speaks to the human heart, and it compels us, and it makes us interested in watching and rewatching, and I think that's what's missing in a lot of the media that's being produced today, and I'm hoping that we can go back to that, because as Grant Morrison said, we tend to live the stories we tell ourselves, so it's important that we tell ourselves good stories.
Yeah, I think and the reason why I wanted to touch on all of these series is I really do think that there is a through line here about speech and just overall pulling yourself together, doing that through habits and also through perfecting your ideas and putting, pulling yourself together to be a representation of the ideas that you have, and being kind of like that thing that people can mirror, acting out your virtues, rather than just preaching them. I mean, that seems to be the theme here. And something about this topic of nuclear war is, I mean, it really has bothered me for a long time too. I grew up having like these repetitive dreams where it would be either Yellowstone exploding, because I found out as a little kid that there was a super volcano that was right in the state next to mine. So I was tormented by that, as well as nuclear holocaust. And I would have these repetitive dreams where I'm with my family and there's like a flame coming at me, And I've talked about this before on other podcasts. I just recorded a podcast with Jacob Daniel about what Christians and libertarians should do in times of war and how they should think of war. And I'm reminded of this C.S. Lewis quote. It's a little lengthy, but I do want to read it because I think it's very relevant to that comic and what you write about it. Because C.S. Lewis, he says, in one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. Quote, how are we to live in an atomic age? End quote. I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed as you were already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented, and quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had indeed one very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics, but we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies, a microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. And I think we can add there just everything we've talked about today about civilizing thyself and really representing the best ideas in the world, and kind of standing up for those ideas and being a symbol for them. And overall, I mean, starting with the article about Locke, like ideas can dominate the mind more than like even if a nuke breaks down our bodies, that doesn't mean that our minds can't be impacted by larger ideas. And hopefully then, through representing those better ideas, we can make ripple effects in our communities and focus locally and impact the friends and people around us. And hopefully that will have a larger impact and take over the world. And I think that that's how we should do these things, is we should really try to convince the people around us and make sure that that foundation is secure, and impact the people around us, I guess, by being the best people we can. And I think that all really, really ties into what you have been writing about.
Well, thank you. And I totally agree. I think that's a great way of thinking about it, because I mean, ultimately, we can only control ourselves. That's our locus of control, and that if we focus on on improving ourselves, like Leonard Reed talked about, that's our best shot at improving the world and improving our family members, improving our coworkers, improving the people we encounter on social media, improving the country, and hopefully even preventing through the ripple effects of that self-improvement, horrors like the nuclear war. But there's a peace in that. There's a peace in knowing that that there's a famous saying of evil may enter into the world, but not through me. And so just focusing on being a force for good, there's a certain imperviousness that comes with that, because then you know that you're doing your best, and that you're doing that all you can, and that that's going to tend towards the best possible results, is to the degree that you do that, and that's all we can do, and just knowing that and letting go of the things we can't control, and there's a peace that comes from that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I did want to make a correction. I said Jacob Daniels show. I meant Jacob Winograd show. His podcast and his handle on Twitter are Jacob Daniels, so it's always confusing, and we give him crap about that all the time. But yeah, before I let you go, I just wanted to touch on one more thing. You and I co-authored a piece with Fee about social media, and it's very timely. It keeps coming up again. Now that Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and I'll link in the description to our article so people can read it. We kind of make the case that free speech is an idea, but legally there's a fundamental question involved about like where can we speak, and we look at free speech through the lens of private property and the private property analysis that Rothbard introduces. So I'll link that there for people to read it. But in light of all of that, I'm wondering how you feel about this Twitter deal. If you're optimistic, I know you tweeted something about Elon potentially caving. Yeah, so I'm just wondering how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I have been cautiously optimistic that Elon Musk, at least he talked a good game, and he seemed to understand the importance of a culture of free speech, but recent developments have cast doubt on that, because he seems to be consulting with just very censorious people, and seems to be backsliding already this early in the game. But another recent development that I think is really germane to our co-authored article is the DHS leaks. The Department of Homeland Security has the details of their disinformation program, and their very close collaboration with big tech. That a report came out by Li Feng in the Intercept, revealing a lot of this, and that was one of the main points in our article, is that that there is a violation of free speech rights, but it's not so much big tech violating users' rights. It's more big government violating big tech's rights, and manipulating the public by doing that, and how that there's just a lot of sort of covert coercion going on, because we point out that you don't have to pass a law and pass a mandate to to get big tech or any for government to get any industry to censor itself. You just have to credibly threaten that kind of crackdown, and big tech will try, or any industry will try to preempt that by playing ball and by going along with the express wishes of the government. And we've seen that happen throughout history. We've seen that with the motion pictures, comic books, also, where the industry would regulate itself in order to forestall government crackdowns. And so now with these revelations, we see that that the government even had like a special portal for one of the big tech companies, I think it was Facebook, for issuing requests for takedowns, for content takedown. And so I think it's important for, especially in libertarian discourse, because there are debates, like even among libertarians and among conservatives, about regulating big tech, because there's calls to regulate big tech, under the rationale that they are, not really private entities, that they are that they are, or that they're somehow violating free speech or something. And to me, that's not the takeaway. Like the answer, like, okay, so DHS is meddling, the government is meddling, and so the answer is to like get government more involved. Like the answer should be getting government less involved. Like and so I don't see how. I mean, yeah. So definitely the events recently have made our article even more applicable. But I just hope that people are taking the right takeaway, that they're not thinking that, oh well, this proves that big tech is basically like colluding with the government. And it's like, yeah, they are, but it's because they're being intimidated into doing that. And sure, there's probably people who politically like doing this anyway, like at any given big tech company, and there's also like an extent to which they might benefit from having that in with the government that other competitors don't have an in with, and that can put them at a competitive advantage. But there's also just the fact that, like, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, that there have been hearings where big tech companies have been hauled before Congress and explicitly threatened with legislative crackdowns. And so, that threat is that's the real problem. Like that's what needs to be fought in order to get rid of this crony capitalist arrangement.
Yeah, and then I guess Elon Musk has promised civil rights leaders that he's going to bring back moderation tools, and he might still police hate speech. And this just happened today. So I'm also sharing in your concern, and it's really interesting to reflect back on our article in light of all of this. And I think really, like, we should call on people like Elon Musk to remain steadfast and push back against the government. And really our responses for people with enough power and influence like Elon to stand up against the government, because I think that the last week has shown that he has a lot of influence, and we need people like him and figures like him, elites like him, to stand up and defend our ideas, because I think the more we have that conversation in the culture and in our cultural leaders, I mean they really can be those figures that I guess we talked about earlier that represent our our ideas and put forth our ideas into the rest of the world by mirroring that. And I hope that people like Elon Musk continue to do that. But we'll see how that goes. The U.S. government also said, I saw this briefly, just a headline yesterday, that they're going to look into whether they can stop the Twitter deal from going through. They're going to try to revisit and see if there's any way for the U.S. government to get involved, because it's clear that Twitter is such a important propaganda tool for them, as it was during the election, as it was during the pandemic, and as it currently is with the Ukraine war. So we'll have to keep our eyes on all of that. But yeah, I appreciate you so much for coming on the show. We'll have to let you go, but if you want to just say any last thoughts or share where people can find you online, and any of those links that I can put in the description, please do, and we can let you go.
Sure. Yeah. So I have 3 Substacks. One you can find at superheroes.substack.com, and another is libertyletters.substack.com, and then the other one is civilize.substack.com. And so those are my superhero, liberty, and self-improvement Substacks. And so yeah, I know that some people who might be interested in one might not be interested in the other two, so that's why I have separate ones. Also, check out my archive at fee.org, and check out Fee's content in general. It's just treasure. Fee.org is just a treasury of resources to learn about the freedom philosophy.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.